Have you ever noticed how the smallest things can carry the heaviest weight? A forgotten object, a faint scent, even a single strand of hair. Sometimes they become chains, binding us to memories we can't let go of. People say time heals. But what if that's not true? What if time only sharpens the silence, turning love into a haunting that refuses to fade? This isn't a story about moving on. It's about what happens when love is so strong, so consuming, that even death can't break it hold. It's about a man who loved so deeply that the walls of his home still breathed with her presence, long after illness had stolen her away. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see parts of yourself in his pain. Because grief doesn't ask permission and love never truly leaves. It lingers, it cuts, it devours. You might think you know how stories of loss end, with acceptance, with healing, with peace. But not this one. Here, every silence is louder than screams. Every shadow hides her face, and every night is a war between sanity and the unbearable weight of memory. The question is not whether love survives. It's whether the one left behind can. So stay with me. Let this story pull you in. Let it challenge what you believe about love, about grief, about what it means to be human. You might not leave with answers, but you'll leave with a piece of the truth, a truth most are too afraid to face. And if you feel this story touch something inside you, consider leaving us a little free tip. Like a comment and a subscription. It costs nothing, but it means everything for us to keep sharing stories that hit this deep. Because sometimes, the most unforgettable tales aren't about victory. They're about the scars that never heal. And tonight, you'll hear one of them. He opened the wardrobe with no expectations. Just another ordinary morning. But there it was, caught on the fabric of his jacket, a single strand of hair. It wasn't just hair. It was a remnant of a time that would never return. He froze, staring at it, and suddenly the weight of memory hit him like a storm. That strand carried more than its fragile form suggested. It carried whispers of nights spent together, soft laughter echoing in the dark, and promises whispered with trembling voices. How many times can something so small awaken a heart already drowning in grief? As his fingers brushed over the delicate thread, he saw her dress again. The one she wore so often, simple and worn, yet now a sacred relic. Funny how the ordinary turns holy once absence becomes permanent. A faded dress, a faint perfume still lingering in the air, or a forgotten trinket tucked away in a drawer. These were no longer things. They were monuments to love and loss, silent witnesses of what disease had stolen from him. Have you ever noticed how the mind betrays us in moments like this? A single object is enough to tear open the door of memory, letting the past flood in. For him, that single strand rebuilt entire scenes. The room once alive with her presence, the vanity echoing with her scent, the bed still shaped by her memory. Everything returned in an instant, as if time were mocking him, pretending she was just in the next room, waiting. And then came the cruelest truth. Grief doesn't hurt only because of the absence, but because of the abundance of what was once shared. Each memory seemed to demand her return, to insist on her presence in a space she would never again occupy. He wanted to resist, to lock the moment away, but he couldn't. Who hasn't felt this? Trapped by an object so trivial, yet transformed into a portal to the past. Even the smallest fragment can become a dagger when it belongs to someone we've lost. And as he stood there, jacket in hand, he couldn't help but wonder, if one fragile hair could unravel him so completely, what else in this house was waiting to ambush him? A photograph buried under dust? A note forgotten in a book? The truth was simple and merciless. When love is real, everything becomes a reminder. And for him, those reminders were only beginning to surface. When night came, the house fell into a silence that was almost unbearable. He would turn off the lights, ready to lie down, but his heart still expected her footsteps. Every creak of the floorboards teased him, as if she might appear at the door. The bed, once a sanctuary, had become a battlefield. He would stretch out his hand instinctively, only to find the cold void where her warmth used to be. It's strange, isn't it? How absence doesn't feel like nothing. It feels like a heavy presence, one that haunts more than it comforts. The disease had stolen her slowly, like a thief who knows the value of every treasure. He remembered the nights when she grew weaker, her laughter fading, her touch trembling. Still, Even in her fragility, she was the strongest person he had ever known. The bed they had once shared wasn't just a place to rest. It was where she had whispered her fears, where he had promised she wasn't alone, where love had fought against time, even as time was winning. And so, when he lay down now, it wasn't just sleep he waited for, it was her. His eyes closed, not to escape reality, but in desperate hope of catching her in a dream. Sometimes, he swore he felt her beside him, the faint impression of a body shifting on the mattress, the scent of her hair drifting in the dark. It was enough to make him hold his breath, afraid that moving would break the illusion. Have you ever clung to a dream so tightly, because waking meant losing them all over again? These nights weren't just sleepless. They were cruel rehearsals of longing. He found himself speaking out loud into the silence, as if she might answer. Whispered confessions, apologies, even jokes that once made her roll her eyes. He repeated them to the darkness, because silence was the enemy and memory the only ally. His heart knew the truth, but his soul kept waiting, convinced that love strong enough to burn through years couldn't just vanish into nothing. And with every night that passed, the line between memory and reality blurred a little more. Was she truly gone, or was she still there, lingering in the shadows, refusing to leave him entirely? He didn't know. All he knew was that he kept waiting for her, as though one evening the sheets might shift and the impossible might happen. And deep inside, he feared what he would find next, a reminder even more powerful than that fragile strand of hair. That morning, while reaching for his jacket, he found it again, the strand of hair still clinging stubbornly to the fabric. It wasn't the first time, but each discovery struck like the first wound. He stared at it as if it were alive, a silent messenger reminding him of what he had lost. Isn't it strange how grief hides in the smallest corners? A single hair could feel heavier than the weight of the whole world. And in that fragile thread he saw her, laughing, singing, dancing, alive. It wasn't just memory, it was betrayal. Life dared to move on, yet this little piece of her refused to disappear. He thought about how that strand had once been tangled with his, pressed against his skin in the heat of love. It was proof that she had existed in his arms, that she wasn't just a dream fading in the distance. And yet, now it mocked him, hanging by a thread, literally, between presence and absence, love and loss. Have you ever found something so simple that it shattered you completely? A letter hidden in an old drawer, a forgotten note scribbled in the margin of a book. For him, this was that object. He could almost hear her voice, soft and teasing, asking why he kept that old jacket. The thought twisted the knife deeper, because he couldn't let go, not of her, not of the memories stitched into every seam. As his hand gripped the fabric, he felt the sting of reality. She wasn't coming back, and yet she was everywhere. The disease had taken her body, but these small remnants made it impossible to bury her spirit. It was cruel and kind at once, because to lose even these reminders would mean to lose her entirely. He found himself torn between the pain of remembering and the terror of forgetting. Which would you choose? And in that torment, he realized something darker. If one hair could unravel him this much, what would happen when he stumbled upon something more? A love letter in her handwriting, a recording of her voice, or a photograph capturing her smile. He braced himself, knowing that the house still held secrets, and each one would demand he relive the love that once defined him, and the loss that nearly destroyed him. Every night, when the lights dimmed and silence wrapped around the house, he swore he could feel her. The bed dipped ever so slightly, as though someone had just lain down beside him. He held his breath, terrified to move, because what if breaking the stillness meant losing her all over again? It wasn't madness, it was longing, the kind of longing that sharpens itself like a blade, cutting deeper the more you resist. Sometimes he reached out in the dark, fingers brushing the sheets as if they might find her hand. But all they ever met was emptiness, colder than any winter. And yet, in that emptiness, his mind painted her silhouette, her head resting on the pillow, her hair cascading across his chest, her breath sinking with his heartbeat. He knew it wasn't real, but it was real enough to keep him awake, craving the impossible. Have you ever caught yourself talking to someone who isn't there? Whispering into thin air, waiting for an answer you know won't come. He did it almost every night. A joke she used to love. An apology for the arguments they never finished. A thank you for the little things she did that he never noticed until it was too late. The room absorbed his words, but the silence after was always louder, always crueler. And still, he couldn't stop, because silence without her voice felt like a death that repeated itself endlessly. Grief wasn't a single wound. It was 1,000 small cuts, reopened every time he remembered she once filled this room with laughter. He thought about people who said, "Time heals everything." But time hadn't healed him. It had only stretched the pain thinner, sharper, like glass splintering under pressure. So he waited, night after night, hoping for that impossible miracle. The soft weight of her body beside his, the brush of her hair on his face, the warmth of a kiss that belonged to another lifetime. And deep down he knew this waiting wasn't just for her. It was for the next memory, the next cruel reminder that would slice open his heart once more. Morning light spilled through the curtains, but it no longer carried warmth. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty pillow beside him, as though expecting it to suddenly move. The silence was heavy, almost unbearable, pressing down on his chest until breathing felt like a chore. Each sunrise was supposed to be a new beginning, yet for him it was nothing more than another reminder that she wouldn't be there. And somehow, the emptiness grew heavier with each passing day. He thought about the little rituals they once shared, the way she hummed while brushing her hair, the way she folded her dress carefully over the chair, the perfume that lingered on her skin long after she left the room. Those details had become treasures, fragments of a love story cut short by an illness that cared nothing for vows or promises. And still, he clung to them with desperate hands, afraid that forgetting would mean betraying her memory. It was a war between holding on and letting go, and he was losing both sides. Sometimes he would wander the house aimlessly, his eyes scanning every corner as though she had just stepped out for a moment. The scent of her perfume on the vanity, the dress folded in the wardrobe. Even the creak of the wooden floor reminded him of her presence. It was as though she lived inside the walls, refusing to release him from their shared story. And while part of him found comfort in this illusion, another part bled from the sharp edge of reality. It was all just echoes and nothing more. Have you ever noticed how grief has a way of turning objects into ghosts? For him, even the smallest things became haunting. A glass left on the shelf, a lipstick cap hidden under the bed, the faint sound of a record they used to play together. Each one spoke louder than words, carving wounds deeper than silence ever could. He wanted to escape, but how do you escape from a house that still breathes with the memories of the one you lost? And so he sat there, day after day, clutching that fragile strand of hair as though it held the key to bringing her back. He knew it was foolish, but love has never cared for logic. The pain was proof that she had been real, that their story had existed, that their love had been worth every tear. Yet somewhere inside, he feared what would happen when the memories ran out, when no more strands, no more scents, no more fragments were left to find. Would he still know how to love her then? At night, exhaustion finally pulled him into restless sleep, but dreams were never kind. She always appeared there, vibrant and alive, smiling the way she used to before the sickness dimmed her glow. For a moment his heart believed. He reached out, feeling her warmth, the softness of her touch, the weight of her presence. But each time, he awoke to the hollow ache of an empty room, his hand clutching at air, his soul sinking under the cruelest of truths. She was gone, yet she kept coming back in dreams. Those dreams were double-edged swords, gifts and punishments wrapped into one. They gave him what he longed for most, only to rip it away at dawn. He often wondered if it was his mind trying to heal him, or if it was her spirit refusing to leave him entirely. Some nights he prayed before bed, asking just for a glimpse, a smile, a word. And when it came, it felt like a miracle. But miracles, he realized, don't always come to save. They sometimes come to torment. He began to blur the lines between what was dream and what was real. Once, he swore he heard her laugh echo in the hallway, so clear it stopped him in his tracks. Another time, he smelled her perfume in the still air of the kitchen, so vivid that his chest tightened as though she had just walked past him. He knew grief could play tricks, but these illusions felt too precise, too intimate, too real. Was love strong enough to anchor her presence beyond the grave? Or was it just his broken mind begging for one more touch? Have you ever woken from a dream so vivid that it clings to you all day? He carried these fragments with him like sacred treasures, replaying them in his mind whenever the silence threatened to consume him. They weren't just dreams. They were his survival. And in a strange way, he feared letting them go more than he feared the pain they brought. Because as long as she appeared at night, there was still a part of him that hadn't lost her completely. And yet, deep down, he knew dreams were fragile. They shattered with the morning light, leaving behind nothing but scars. He dreaded the day they might stop coming altogether, the day his mind might finally accept her absence, because then, even in the shadows of sleep, she would be gone. And that possibility was a darkness deeper than any night he had ever endured. Grief isn't only in the heart. It takes root in the body, too. He began to notice how the weight of absence pressed into his shoulders, how his chest tightened each time silence fell too heavy. Nights without rest left dark circles under his eyes. But it was more than exhaustion. It was the way his body carried her ghost, the way his pulse quickened when a memory struck, as though his own heart was rebelling against the emptiness she left behind. Love, once his strength, had become the very reason his body trembled. Some mornings, he would wake with the faintest echo of her touch still tingling on his skin. He knew it wasn't real, but the body doesn't always care for reason. The senses are stubborn, holding on to what the mind tries to release. Her perfume still seemed to cling to his shirts. The warmth of her presence still seemed to linger in the bed. Even the sound of her voice seemed to rattle in his ears, tricking him into turning his head, expecting to see her standing there. And every time, his body betrayed him with that painful flicker of hope. Have you ever noticed how grief mimics illness? He felt weaker, slower, as though his body were carrying not just his own weight, but the gravity of two souls. Food lost its taste. Laughter felt foreign. Even breathing sometimes seemed like a task he had to force himself to complete. Doctors might have called it stress, but he knew better. It wasn't stress, it was love. Love refusing to die quietly inside him. It clawed at his chest, reminding him every day that she had been real and that his body would never forget. There were moments when his legs carried him into places they once shared without him even realizing it. The park bench where she read under the sun. The cafe where she laughed too loud and drew curious glances. The corner store where she teased him for forgetting the grocery list. His body led him there like muscle memory, as though trying to stitch back the life that disease had unraveled. And when he realized what he was doing, he couldn't decide if it was comfort or torture. Maybe it was both. And so, he lived in a body that remembered more than his mind could bear. Every heartbeat, every shiver, every ache was tied to her. He wondered if it would always be this way, if love could become a permanent scar etched into bone and blood. The thought terrified him, yet he clung to it, because maybe, just maybe, that scar was the only part of her he still had left. And if the body refused to forget, perhaps it was because the story wasn't finished yet. Silence had never been so loud. Before, it was filled with her humming in the kitchen, the rustle of her dress as she moved through the house, the soft rhythm of her breathing at night. Now, the quiet pressed into every corner, turning familiar spaces into hollow shells. He often caught himself holding his breath, waiting for a sound that would never come, as if silence itself was mocking him. Absence doesn't just sit still, it screams. And every day, he heard it louder. He tried to fill the void with music once, putting on the records they used to love. But instead of comfort, each note felt like a knife twisting deeper. The songs weren't just melodies anymore. They were ghosts. The lyrics carried her voice. The harmonies carried her smile, and the silence between the tracks carried her absence. Have you ever heard music so heavy it made your chest ache? For him, every chorus was a reminder that the duet had become a solo. Sometimes he would speak, just to break the quiet, a muttered thought, a question tossed into the air, even a nervous laugh. Anything to convince himself that the house wasn't swallowing him whole. But silence always answered back, cold and merciless. It was in that reply that he realized something cruel. Grief doesn't only live in memories. It lives in the spaces where sound used to be. And the quieter the house became, the louder his longing grew. The nights were the worst. He lay awake, straining his ears, half convinced he might catch the faint echo of her footsteps, the whisper of her voice calling his name. More than once, he thought he did, and rushed to the door, only to find nothing but shadows. He would laugh bitterly at himself, but even that laugh was swallowed whole by the silence. It was as though the house had made a pact to erase every sound but his own, and so he sat in the silence, haunted by what it once carried. Each creak of the floor, each sigh of the wind through the window, became a cruel trick of memory. He knew the quiet wouldn't break, that no melody, no voice, no laugh would return to fill it. Still, he listened, because deep down he feared the moment silence became normal. That would mean she was truly gone, not just from the house, but from him. The silence didn't just haunt him, it began to break him. Nights stretched into endless hours where reality twisted at the edges. He swore he saw her shadow crossing the hallway, just out of reach. Once, half asleep, he heard her whisper his name so clearly that he answered out loud, his voice trembling. But when the air gave no reply, he collapsed into the chair, his chest heaving, unsure if he was still dreaming. Grief was no longer just memory. It was starting to feel like madness. He began talking to her more often, not just in whispers, but in full conversations. At the dinner table, he'd pour 2 glasses of wine, setting one across from him. He would speak about his day, his fears, even laugh at his own jokes, waiting, always waiting, for the moment her voice might slip between his words. Outsiders would have called it delusion, but to him, it was survival. Better be thought insane than to surrender to the suffocating weight of silence. Have you ever felt your own mind betray you? He did, over and over. The scent of her perfume came and went like smoke. Sometimes he would find himself tracing the outline of her body on the bed, convinced that if he closed his eyes, she'd materialize in the dark. When reality returned, the emptiness was unbearable, sharper than any knife. And yet, he invited these illusions, even nurtured them, because they kept him tethered to a love too fierce to release. His friend grew concerned, urging him to move on, to pack her things away, to stop living inside the echo of what was gone. But how do you explain to others that you're not living in the past? You're living with it. That her presence was stitched so deeply into his soul that trying to cut it out will be like tearing flesh from bone? Their pity felt insulting, their words meaningless. Only he knew the truth. Losing her had fractured more than his heart. It had split his very sense of self. And as the days bled into nights, he no longer trusted what was real. The house whispered. The shadows moved. Her laughter flickered through the air like candlelight. Impossible to grasp, but impossible to deny. He wasn't sure if grief was keeping him alive, or if it was slowly killing him. All he knew was that her absence had become his prison, and his only escape might be the very illusions that threatened his sanity. By now, the man no longer distinguished between memory and reality. The house had become a living tomb, echoing with whispers that only he could hear. At first, it was just fragments, her perfume, her laughter, the weight on the bed beside him. But soon, she was everywhere. He saw her in the corner of his eye, heard her singing in the next room, felt her hand brushing against his. And though he knew it wasn't real, he chose not to fight it anymore. It was easier to surrender than to face the abyss of her absence. He stopped opening the curtains. Daylight felt like betrayal, exposing the cruel truth he didn't want to see. The world outside moved on, oblivious, while inside, time froze. His meals went untouched. His voice grew hoarse from speaking to someone who would never answer. Neighbors whispered about the man who lived in shadows, but he didn't care. Sanity, survival, society, none of it mattered anymore. All that mattered was keeping her alive in the only place she still existed, his mind. Have you ever seen someone cling so tightly to the past that it swallows him whole? That's what he became. A prisoner of love, bound not by chains but by memories sharper than knives. Every night, he welcomed the hallucinations, even begged for them. They were his punishment and his comfort, the sweet torment of a love too strong to die. And though his body grew weaker, his devotion only deepened. Love had turned into obsession, and obsession into his only reason to keep breathing. But obsession is merciless. It doesn't soothe, it devours. His reflection in the mirror became unrecognizable. Hollow eyes, trembling hands, a man undone by grief. Yet when he looked closer, he swore he saw her face overlapping his own, as if she were still there, fused into the marrow of his being. The line between them blurred until he didn't know where he ended and where she began. Perhaps that was his destiny, to become half man, half memory, forever trapped in the ruins of what once was. And so, one night, as the house lay silent, he placed a jacket with her hair over his chest and closed his eyes. He whispered her name, just once, with the last strength he had. To anyone else, the room was empty. But in his mind, she was there, lie beside him, smiling as she had in the days before illness stole her away. And in that final moment, he didn't feel alone. Love hadn't saved him, but it had consumed him completely, until there was nothing left but the echo of two souls bound together, even in ruin. Now it's your turn. Tell me, have you ever kept something so simple, yet so powerful, that it carried an entire world of memories? Maybe it was a letter, a shirt, a song that instantly brought someone back to you. Do you believe love can survive beyond time, or does it slowly consume the ones left behind? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to know how this story connects with your life. And here's a challenge for you. Drop the name of a song you love, one that carries a deep story or memory for you. It doesn't matter if it's happy, heartbreaking, or bittersweet. We'll take those songs and transform them into powerful stories, just like the one you've heard today. Imagine your favorite music reborn as a tale that speaks not only to you, but to everyone listening. If this story touched you, even just a little, give us that free tip. Hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe with notifications on. It costs nothing, but it helps us keep creating stories that make you feel something real. Because here, music doesn't end when the song stops. It becomes flesh, memory, and storytelling. And the next song we turn into a story might just be the one you choose.